Joining us now to break down the significance of these developments in the Middle East is Josh Reinstein, the president of the Israel Allies Foundation and the author of the book Titus, Trump, and the Triumph of Israel. So, Josh, I'm really glad to have you on because last week we saw some major developments regarding some peace negotiations taking place in the Middle East. I want to focus on Israel right now. Of course, they're improving their ties with the United Arab Emirates, with Bahrain as well. How significant is this development?
This is incredibly significant. We've seen something that we've never thought would be possible before. This is proof that the Trump-Netanyahu doctrine of peace through strength works in the Middle East. Tomorrow they're going to sign the Abraham Accords, the first peace deal in the last 25 years between an Arab country and Israel. And it's with Bahrain, United Arab Emirates. But also just this week, we saw countries like Serbia and Kosovo move their embassies to Jerusalem. The first African country, Malawi, talked about moving its embassy to Jerusalem. So by strengthening Israel, we're seeing incredible peace here in the Middle East.
And it wasn't too long ago when people were warning us that the move of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem could cause some chaos or even do away with any diplomatic relations in the Middle East. But as of right now, that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems as if other countries are following the lead of the United States, and even some countries that in the past have not done business with Israel are now seeming as if they're open to at least having talks. And I think that's a major development. And when we look around the Middle East, for example, we see the Trump administration talking about bringing home troops from Afghanistan, from Iraq as well. Critics of that decision will say that it does put Israel in jeopardy since there won't be much of an American presence. Do you agree with that mentality?
Well, for your first point, you're 100% right. Every step that the Trump administration has done in the Middle East over the last 3.5 years, everyone said it's going to lead to death and destruction, blood in the streets, a third intifada, and of course, it's just brought peace closer together. The Afghanistan peace deal with Taliban, it doesn't play much here in Israel. People are not so concerned about it. Just because the Taliban's never going to have peace with Israel. We're for freedom and rights and democracy, and they're completely against that. So they're never going to be our friend. But you don't make peace between countries and terrorist organizations. You make peace between countries and countries.
You're exactly right. And I think that's an issue that a lot of people had when it came to this issue in the past, is the idea that oftentimes it seemed like the U.S. was trying to appease Iran or appease Hamas, kind of play the two sides of these conflicts without really acknowledging the fact that in a lot of these situations, one of the countries is our ally, and the other one is quite literally calling for deaths of some U.S. ambassadors. I'm referring to Iran in that latest one, where recent reports suggested that they're looking for retaliation for the Qasem Soleimani strike. So I think that that's a problem that, for example, took place in the past, is a lot of people were trying to appease Iran or try to figure out exactly what Iran wanted. And I think that was problematic because Iran is not our friend. Iran is not a friend of Israel either. But when we look at these developments as well, why has the Trump administration been successful on this front, where other prior administrations, for example, have not been able to make progress?
Well, I think the big difference between the Trump administration and the past administration, the Obama administration, is that the Obama administration said that Iran is the answer to peace in the Middle East, and the problem with peace in the Middle East is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Trump administration says, no, that's not true. Israel, the only free democracy in the Middle East, is the answer to peace in the Middle East, and Iran is the problem with peace. And that juxtaposition, that change in policy, has changed everything in the Middle East. And ironically, the Obama administration's appeasement of Iran really scared the moderate Arab countries, and that's why a lot of them are saying, look, if we can't always count on America, we need to stand with Israel.
Interesting. And Josh, I think it's a really interesting point to bring up, too, because it's not to say that the Trump administration, for example, has put Palestine or the Palestinian authorities to the side in all these efforts. It wasn't too long ago where they were trying to put together an economic type of recovery plan to try to build up the Gaza Strip that way and try to at least facilitate talks between the two sides that way. But it seems as if those talks have died at the result of the PLO and Hamas, organizations such as that, who just don't want to engage with talks with Israel. So is the position of the Trump administration and maybe even some of the allies in the Middle East still the prospect of a two-state solution, or is that starting to develop a little bit differently as well?
Well, I think the ball's really in the court of the Palestinian Authority. You have to understand, every step that Trump has taken, from moving the embassy to Jerusalem, to scrapping the Iranian deal, to recognizing the Golan Heights, to enacting Taylor Force that stops paying terror ransoms to terrorists, has been scoffed at by the State Department officials, former presidents, diplomats around the world, saying it's going to bring death and destruction in the Middle East. Yet he always said, no, it's going to bring peace to the Middle East by strengthening Israel. And he was right. All right. So now the Palestinian Authority, who's been sitting on the sidelines saying, oh, this is going to blow up in his face, now they have to make a decision. Are they going to engage in peace, or are they going to step back from peace? I believe that they're going to, once again, miss an opportunity for peace and step back. But as I mentioned before, peace is made between countries, not between terrorist organizations and countries. So even if the Palestinian Authority takes a step back, I think peace with Palestinian people is closer because of these peace deals that we're seeing today.
And that is one thing that has complicated those negotiations in the past, is that there's not always a central government or a central authority to have these negotiations with. I mean, Israel, of course, has its government, but who do you talk to? Is it the officials in Gaza? Do you include Hamas? What do you do about the West Bank, Golan Heights, as you were just saying? They're separated type of territories, but I think that adds to the complication of this issue within itself. But let me ask you, are you optimistic about peace in the Middle East, acknowledging these latest developments?
Absolutely. I'm very optimistic about peace in the Middle East because we're seeing that moderate Arab countries are coming closer to Israel. When you have a strong Israel, everything's possible. When you strengthen Israel and Israel's strong, you can make peace. When Israel's weak, when you're pushing pressure on Israel, then you get nothing in the Middle East. The strong survives, and peace through strength is really what works here. And what you said before is 100% right. You know, they say two-state solution, but you got Hamas in Gaza, you got the PA in Judea and Samaria. Mm-hmm. You got 80% Palestinian in Jordan. We're talking about a 5-state solution right now. The 2-state solution is just a moniker. Real peace is made on the ground. And you got to give incredible credit to the Trump administration for making real peace. We're going to see it tomorrow in the Abraham Accords.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think you have to give credit to Israel, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, all the countries that are at least willing to have a dialogue, because that's something, it may not seem like a lot right now, but just a few years ago, that was an unthinkable possibility. But Josh Reinstein, I really appreciate you coming on the program tonight and breaking down the developments that we're seeing between the U.S., Israel, and the rest of the Middle East. Thank you.